When the heavy oak doors of the church swung open on my wedding day, I didn't look at my soon-to-be husband. I looked at the front row. The empty space wasn't just a missing guest. It was my father, choosing my sister's impromptu Italian vacation over walking me down the aisle. If you want to understand the betrayal that shattered my family, you first have to understand the unspoken rule of the Harrison household. Savannah's world spun on a golden axis, and the rest of us were just lucky to be in its orbit. Savannah is my older sister by 3 years. To the outside world, she was a charismatic, striking woman who always landed on her feet. To me, she was a black hole that swallowed all the oxygen in the room. Our father, Robert, was a successful architect in suburban Chicago. He was a man who measured his worth by his ability to fix things, but he had a fatal flaw: he could never say no to Savannah. Growing up, the disparity was baked into our daily lives. When Savannah turned 16, she was gifted a brand new Lexus because, as Dad put it, she needs something safe and reliable for her extracurriculars. When I turned 16, I was handed the keys to a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a broken AC. When Savannah dropped out of a prestigious art school after 3 semesters because she wasn't feeling creatively nourished, Dad paid off her apartment lease and funded a 6-month backpacking trip through Southeast Asia. When I worked 2 jobs to put myself through a state nursing program, Dad patted me on the back and called me his practical girl. I was the rock. Savannah was the butterfly. And unfortunately, people rarely look at the rock when a butterfly is fluttering by. I had made my peace with this dynamic by the time I met Liam. Liam was a structural engineer, steady, kind, and completely immune to the Harrison family dramatics. When he proposed to me under the sprawling oak tree in his parents' backyard, I felt a profound sense of security. For the first time in my 27 years, I was someone's undeniable first choice. We planned an October wedding, nothing overly extravagant, a cozy, elegant ceremony at St. Jude's followed by a reception in a beautifully restored barn just outside the city. For 6 months, wedding planning was a joy. Liam's family was incredibly supportive, and even Dad seemed genuinely excited. He gave me a generous check for the catering and promised he had his custom tuxedo tailored and ready. Then, exactly 6 weeks before my wedding day, Savannah had what she melodramatically referred to as her quarter-life catastrophe. She had been dating a wealthy, older restaurateur named Todd for about 2 years. Todd practically funded her lavish lifestyle, letting her play influencer in his sprawling penthouse. But Todd abruptly ended the relationship, citing Savannah's refusal to grow up. To make matters worse, she was forced to move out of his penthouse and back into her old childhood bedroom at Dad's house. The house plunged into chaos. Savannah wouldn't leave her bed. She cried so loudly it echoed through the vents. Dad went into complete overdrive, hovering over her like she was a terminally ill patient, 9-year-old woman going through a standard breakup. I tried to be empathetic. I really did. I brought over takeout, offered to help her look for apartments, and even suggested she bring a friend as a plus one to the wedding to take her mind off things. She barely acknowledged me, staring blankly at the wall while Dad rubbed her shoulders. Then came the Sunday dinner. Liam and I were sitting at Dad's mahogany dining table. Savannah emerged from her room for the first time in days, looking surprisingly fresh-faced, holding a glossy travel brochure. "I've made a decision," she announced, dropping the brochure onto the table. It was for an exclusive, luxury wellness retreat in Tuscany, Italy. I need to heal. I need to get out of this toxic city where everything reminds me of Todd. The retreat is for 3 weeks. I leave at the end of next month. My stomach performed a slow, sickening roll. "Savannah," I said, my voice tight. "The end of next month is my wedding." She waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at me. "Oh, Chloe, don't make this about you. It's just a party. I'm having a mental health crisis. I literally cannot breathe in this zip code right now." I looked at Dad, expecting him to gently remind her of the calendar. Instead, he was looking at the brochure. "Tuscany," Dad murmured. "The air there." It might be exactly what you need to reset, sweetie. There's a catch, Daddy, Savannah pouted, her voice slipping into the little girl register she always used when she wanted a favor. I'm too emotionally fragile to navigate international travel by myself. I need you to come with me. Just for the first week. To get me settled. The silence in the dining room was so absolute, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Liam reached under the table, gripping my knee tightly. Dad, I said, my voice trembling, the first week of her trip is the week of my wedding. You're walking me down the aisle. Dad finally looked up, his eyes darting nervously between me and Savannah. Now, Chloe, let's not panic. Let's look at the dates. Maybe we can shift things around. Shift things around? Liam interjected, his usually calm voice laced with disbelief. Robert, the venue is booked. The invitations are out. It's 6 weeks away. Chloe, you have to understand, Dad said, leaning forward, using his reasonable voice. You have Liam. You have his whole family. You are so strong, so settled. Savannah is falling apart. If she doesn't do this, I don't know what will happen to her. She needs her father right now. I need my father, I snapped, pushing my chair back. It is my wedding day. Savannah burst into theatrical tears, burying her face in her hands. See? This is exactly why I need to leave. Nobody in this family cares about my mental health. It's all about Chloe's stupid rustic barn party. It's not a party, Savannah. It's my marriage, I yelled back. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Enough, both of you. He turned to me, his expression hardening into the resolute stubbornness I had feared my entire life. Chloe, your sister is in crisis. I am paying for this wedding, but my primary job as a father is to protect my children when they are hurting. I will fly to Italy with Savannah, get her settled at the retreat, and I will try to fly back in time for Saturday. Try. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. If you get on that plane, I whispered, don't bother trying to come back for Saturday. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the crisp autumn air, Liam, right behind me. I didn't cry then. I was too consumed by a burning, suffocating realization. No matter what milestone I reached, I would always be the sacrificial lamb on the altar of Savannah's happiness. For the next 6 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended animation. A small, pathetic part of me believed Dad would come to his senses. I thought, surely, as the days ticked down, the weight of what he was doing would crush his conscience. I thought about going to his office, throwing a fit, or begging him, but Liam stopped me, not with force, but with quiet logic. You shouldn't have to convince your father to care about your wedding, Liam told me one night as I sat on our living room floor, staring blankly at the seating chart. If you beg him, and he stays, he'll be resentful. He'll spend the whole day texting Savannah. You deserve a father who wants to be there. He was right, so I went low contact. I finalized the florist, did my dress fittings with Liam's mother and sister, and ignored the occasional, breezy text messages from Dad that read like weather reports. Hope the catering tasting went well. Savannah is finally eating solid food again. 10 days before my wedding, Dad and Savannah boarded a first-class flight to Florence. The morning of the wedding was stunning. It was one of those rare, crisp October days in the Midwest where the sky is a piercing, cloudless blue and the autumn leaves look like they've been set on fire. I sat in the bridal suite of Street, Jude's, surrounded by my bridesmaids. The makeup artist, a sweet woman named Jen, kept dabbing delicately at the corners of my eyes. You're glowing, Chloe. Jen smiled, holding up a mirror. I looked at my reflection. My hair was swept up in a loose chignon, the lace of my dress hugged my shoulders perfectly, and my makeup was flawless. I looked like a bride, but inside, there was a heavy, cold stone sitting right at the bottom of my chest. There had been no text from Dad that morning. No phone call. His flight back, the one he supposedly booked to make it just in time, had allegedly been cancelled due to a European air traffic control strike. He had left a voicemail the night before, his voice crackling over international lines. Chloe, honey, I am so sorry. The strike grounded everything. I'm stuck in Florence. I know you're disappointed, but Uncle Dave is going to step in, okay? He'll walk you down. Have a beautiful day. Savannah says congratulations. We'll celebrate when I'm back. Disappointed. He called missing his daughter's wedding disappointing, like it was a rained-out baseball game. An hour before the ceremony, Uncle Dave, Dad's younger, much more grounded brother, knocked on the door of the bridal suite. When the bridesmaids cleared out to finish getting dressed, Dave walked over and took my hands. His eyes were red. "He's not coming, Dave," I said, my voice cracking. "I know, kiddo." Dave sighed heavily, anger flashing across his face. "I gave Robert a piece of my mind last night. I told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. But he's blind when it comes to her." Dave squeezed my hands tightly. "It would be the honor of my life to walk you down that aisle, but only if you want me to. If you want to walk alone or with Liam, I'll be right there in the front row cheering the loudest." "I want you to do it," I said, a tear finally escaping and ruining Jen's hard work. "Thank you." When the music swelled and the heavy oak doors of the church opened, I took a deep breath. Uncle Dave offered me his arm, strong and steady. I stepped into the aisle. The church was packed. 200 faces turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of awe and, in the eyes of my extended family, profound pity. They all knew. The Harrison family gossip mill had ensured everyone knew exactly why the bride's father wasn't there. I kept my chin high. I looked at the front row on the left side. My mother had passed away when I was 10, so her seat was symbolically empty, marked with a single white rose. Next to it was another empty chair. The seat meant for the father of the bride. It was a gaping wound in the middle of a beautiful room. But then, I looked past the empty chair and saw Liam at the altar. He was looking at me like I was the only person on the planet. His eyes were shining, and he gave me a tiny, reassuring nod. The cold stone in my chest cracked. I let go of the pain of who wasn't there, and focused entirely on the man who was. The ceremony was a blur of beautiful words and happy tears. When we were finally pronounced husband and wife, the applause was deafening. I felt a surge of triumph. I had survived it. I was married. I was a Bennett now. But the illusion of peace shattered just 2 hours into the reception. We were in the rustic barn, the string lights casting a warm, golden glow over the tables. We had just finished our first dance, and I sat down at the sweetheart table to grab a sip of water. My maid of honor, Sarah, had left my phone on the table. The screen lit up with a notification. It was an Instagram tag. Against my better judgment, I tapped the screen. It was a post from Savannah, a carousel of photos. The first was a selfie of her and Dad, sitting on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the Duomo in Florence. They were holding up crystal glasses of Aperol spritzes, laughing uproariously at the camera. Savannah looked tan, radiant, and entirely unbothered by her quarter-life catastrophe. The caption read, "Sometimes you just need to escape the noise and find your peace. So blessed to have a daddy who drops everything to fly across the world for me when I'm struggling. My rock, my best friend. Number Tuscany, number healing journey, number family first. Family first." The audacity of those 2 words hit me like a physical blow. She had posted it exactly when she knew my reception was starting. It wasn't just a vacation photo. It was a deliberate, public planting of a flag. She was marking her territory, ensuring that even on my wedding day, she was the center of his universe. "Hey." Liam's voice pulled me back. He slid into the seat next to me, taking the phone from my trembling hands. He looked at the photo, his jaw tightening so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. Without a word, he powered off the phone and slid it into his suit pocket. "Look at me, Chloe," he said fiercely. I looked up, my vision blurred with angry tears. "They are 1,000 miles away, living in a delusion. You are here, in reality, surrounded by people who showed up for you. We are done with them. Let them have Tuscany." "You have a husband." I nodded, wiping my eyes, and stood up to rejoin the party. I danced, I drank champagne, and I cut the cake. But underneath the smiles, A quiet, icy resolve settled into my bones. Liam was right. I was done. I didn't know it then, but the universe has a very strange sense of humor. While my father and sister were toasting to their healing journey in Italy, the foundation of their entire world was quietly, catastrophically collapsing back home. And it wouldn't be long before the golden child and her enabler would come crawling back, begging for the very daughter they had left behind at the altar. The first few months of my marriage to Liam were blissfully quiet. We settled into our three-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, a cozy house with a wraparound porch that Liam had spent a year renovating. We spent our weekends painting walls, hosting game nights with friends who actually showed up for us, and learning the comfortable rhythms of sharing a life. I instituted a strict no Savannah rule in our household. I didn't block my father's number. A tiny, foolish part of me couldn't take that final step, but I muted his notifications. The few times he called, I let it go to voicemail. His messages were always brief, superficial, and entirely devoid of apologies. They usually centered around Savannah's progress and how the Tuscan sun was doing wonders for her aura. They ended up extending their 3-week trip into a 2-month European sabbatical. It wasn't until the second week of February that the glossy, curated facade of the Harrison family violently shattered. It was a Tuesday evening. Liam was in the kitchen searing chicken while I was grading papers at the dining table. I had recently transitioned from bedside nursing to teaching at the local nursing college. My phone buzzed. It was Uncle Dave. Hey, Uncle Dave, I answered, smiling. If you're calling about the Bears game this weekend, Liam already bought the dip. Chloe. Dave's voice was uncharacteristically gravelly. There was no warmth in it, only a heavy, exhausted dread. Are you sitting down? I put my pen down. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I am now. What's wrong? Is Dad hurt? Not physically, Dave sighed. I could hear a lighter flicking and the sharp inhale of a cigarette Dave hadn't smoked in 10 years. But the firm is gone, Chloe. Harrison and Associates is dissolving. Arthur Henderson locked your father out of the building this morning. I stared blankly at the wall. My father and Arthur Henderson had built that architectural firm from the ground up over 30 years. It was his pride and joy, the source of our comfortable upper-middle-class upbringing. Locked him out? Dave, what are you talking about? Did they have a fight? Your father has been embezzling, Chloe. The word dropped into the kitchen like a lead weight. Liam, hearing the tone of my voice, turned the stove off and came to stand beside me, resting a heavy, grounding hand on my shoulder. Embezzling? I whispered, my mind rejecting the information. Dad? That's impossible. He's a stickler for the rules. He makes us keep receipts for everything. He kept receipts. All right, Dave said bitterly. Chloe, Arthur called me in as neutral family to try and manage the fallout before he goes to the authorities. Robert has been draining the firm's operating accounts for the last 3 years. He's been taking client retainers and funneling them into a private offshore account. But that's not even the worst part. Do you know why Todd actually dumped Savannah? My stomach bottomed out. Savannah told us Todd couldn't handle her creative spirit. Dave let out a dark, humorless bark of a laugh. Todd dumped her because Savannah stole his American Express black card and racked up $85,000 in unauthorized charges in 2 months. Designer bags, jewelry, a deposit on a leased Bentley. Todd caught her, packed her bags, and told her he was going to the police. The room started to spin. The quarter-life catastrophe. The sudden move back home, the hysterical crying in her bedroom. It wasn't a broken heart. It was the terror of facing felony fraud charges. Your father panicked. Dave continued, his voice breaking slightly. To keep Savannah out of prison, he paid Todd off. In cash, a lump sum of $100,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop the charges. But Robert didn't have that kind of liquid cash anymore. He took out a second mortgage on the house, which is now 90 days past due and facing foreclosure, and he drained the firm's payroll account. I felt the blood drain from my face. The Italy trip. I breathed out. Paid for with the firm's emergency corporate credit line, Dave confirmed. Arthur found out yesterday when the bank called about a bounced check to their main steel supplier. Robert is ruined, Chloe. He's broke, he's likely facing charges, and the bank is taking the house. They land at O'Hare tomorrow afternoon, and they have absolutely nowhere to go. I hung up the phone. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. I looked up at Liam, who had heard the entire conversation through the speaker. For months, I had agonized over why I wasn't enough for my father. Why he would choose to hold Savannah's hand in Tuscany while I walked down the aisle alone. The truth was so much uglier. He hadn't just chosen her over me. He had burned his entire life to the ground to shield her from the consequences of her own criminal entitlement. Well, Liam said quietly, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. I guess the healing journey is officially over. They didn't call, they didn't text, they simply appeared. It was a bleak, freezing rainstorm on a Saturday morning in early March. Liam was in the garage working on his woodworking lathe, and I was in the living room folding laundry, savoring the smell of the coffee brewing in the kitchen. When the doorbell rang, I assumed it was the mail carrier dropping off a package. I swung the front door open, an easy smile on my face. The smile died instantly. Standing on my porch, drenched and looking like a pair of drowned rats, were my father and Savannah. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years in the 4 months since I'd last seen him. His face was gray, his shoulders were hunched, and the expensive tailored coat he wore looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of his defeated posture. Savannah, on the other hand, looked furious. She was clutching her 2 massive Rimowa suitcases, wearing oversized designer sunglasses despite the heavy rain, and tapping her leather-booted foot impatiently. "Chloe, thank God," Dad breathed, stepping forward to hug me. I took a rigid step back, holding my hand out like a traffic cop. "What are you doing here?" Savannah pushed past him, shoving her suitcases over my threshold, dripping muddy water onto my hardwood floors. Ugh. Can we do the whole reunion thing inside? My Gucci loafers are literally dissolving in this toxic rain. Which way is the guest room? I need a hot shower, like yesterday. She didn't look at me. She didn't say hello. She didn't say congratulations on the wedding she caused my father to miss. She just demanded a room. Liam emerged from the hallway, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. He stopped dead in his tracks, his tall frame suddenly blocking the archway to the rest of the house. He didn't say a word, but the sudden drop in temperature in the room was palpable. "Robert," Liam said, his voice flat, devoid of any familial warmth. "Savannah." "Liam, my boy." Dad tried to muster up his old, booming patriarchal voice, but it cracked pathetically. "Look at this place. You've done a marvelous job with the trim. Listen, kids. We've run into a bit of a logistical snag." I crossed my arms over my chest, digging my fingernails into my sleeves to keep my hands from shaking. "Uncle Dave called me, Dad. I know about Arthur, I know about the foreclosure, and I know about Todd." Dad flinched as if I had struck him. The fake, jovial mask melted right off his face, leaving behind a pathetic, desperate man. He looked down at his shoes. "Dave always did have a big mouth. Is that really your takeaway here?" I asked, my voice rising. "Dave's mouth?" Savannah sighed loudly, dropping her oversized Birkin bag onto my armchair. "Oh, please, Chloe, don't be so dramatic. It's just money. Daddy and Arthur had a little disagreement, and Todd is a vindictive sociopath. We're just going to stay here for a few months until Daddy liquidates some assets and we get a new penthouse downtown." I stared at her. She genuinely believed her own delusions. She had no concept of the wreckage she stood in the center of. "There are no assets to liquidate, Savannah," Liam said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Your father is millions of dollars in debt. He's facing criminal charges. You aren't getting a penthouse. You're lucky you aren't in a county jail." Savannah scoffed, rolling her eyes behind her sunglasses. "Daddy, tell him to stop being so morbid." "He's right, Vanny," Dad whispered, looking physically ill. He finally looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Chloe, sweetie, I need your help. Arthur froze my accounts. The bank locked the doors to the house. We spent our last $200 on the cab fare from the airport. I need. I need a loan. Just $60,000 to get a lawyer and put down a deposit on a rental. And Savannah needs a place to stay. Just for 6 to 8 months. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. I swallowed it down, replacing it with a cold, sharp rage. Let me get this straight, I said, stepping closer to him. You miss my wedding. You choose to fly to Europe to coddle a 29-year-old woman who committed credit card fraud. You post photos bragging about your healing journey while I am walking down the aisle with an empty chair in the front row. And now, you come to the daughter you abandoned, asking for $60,000 and a free hotel? Dad's face flushed red, a mixture of shame and sudden, defensive anger. I am your father, Chloe. I provided for you your entire life. And let's not forget, I gave you $25,000 for that barn party of yours. You wouldn't even have had a wedding if it wasn't for me. You owe me. Hold on, Liam interrupted, stepping between me and my father. His eyes were blazing. You have a lot of nerve bringing up that wedding check, Robert. Liam reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and extracted a neatly folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it up. It was a photocopy of a voided check. We never cashed it, Liam said quietly. Dad stared at the piece of paper, his mouth dropping open. What? Why? Because, Liam said, his voice dripping with disgust. The day you handed this to Chloe, I noticed the account number. It was drawn from a corporate holding account, not your personal savings. As an engineer in this city, I work with a lot of developers. I'd heard the rumors that Harrison and Associates was struggling to pay contractors. I wasn't about to let my wife start her marriage funded by stolen money. We paid for the wedding ourselves. You contributed absolutely nothing. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad looked at the voided check, then at me, the reality of his utter powerlessness finally crashing down on him. The ultimate leverage he thought he had, his financial control over me, was an illusion. But Savannah whined, her voice taking on that shrill, little girl quality. Where am I supposed to sleep? Chloe, I have severe trauma-induced insomnia. I literally need the primary bedroom, or I won't be able to function. You and Liam can take the guest room, right? You're used to roughing it. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. I saw the designer clothes bought with stolen money, the tan maintained while my father's business collapsed, the bottomless pit of need that had consumed my family's entire existence. Savannah? I said, my voice shockingly steady. Pick up your bags. She blinked. Excuse me? Pick up your bags, turn around, and walk out of my house. Dad reached out, his hand shaking. Chloe, please. It's freezing outside. We have nowhere to go. She's your sister. No, I replied, stepping back so his hand met empty air. She is your responsibility. You chose her, Dad. Every single day of my life, you chose her. You chose her mistakes. You chose her tantrums. You chose her crimes over my milestones. You made your bed in Tuscany. Now you get to sleep in it here. You're a monster, Savannah shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly, hateful mask. She grabbed her Birkin bag and threw it over her shoulder. You've always been jealous of me. Always. Come on, Daddy. We don't need this pathetic suburban loser. I'll call Todd. He still loves me. I know he does. Dad didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, looking at me with a devastating realization dawning in his eyes. He had sacrificed his steady, reliable daughter for a parasite that had finally sucked him dry. I'm sorry, Chloe, he whispered, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said, feeling absolutely nothing. Liam, open the door. Liam pulled the front door open, the wind howling and blowing rain onto the entryway rug. Dad slowly turned, grabbing Savannah's heavy suitcases. He dragged them out onto the porch, his shoulders slumped, looking like a ghost haunting his own life. Savannah marched out past him, holding her jacket over her head, cursing loudly about the weather. Liam shut the door firmly, locking the deadbolt with a loud, satisfying click. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the rain battering against the windows. The house was quiet again. Safe. Liam wrapped his arms around me from behind, burying his face in my hair. "You okay?" he murmured. I took a deep breath, smelling coffee and cedarwood, and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 16 years old. "Yeah," I smiled, leaning back against his solid chest. "I really am." The morning after I locked my father and sister out in the freezing rain, the real world came crashing down on the Harrison family with the force of a wrecking ball. The protective bubble my father had spent 3 decades building around his golden child had officially burst, and the shrapnel hit them both instantly. Arthur Henderson, my father's former business partner, was not a man who believed in second chances or quiet settlements. He had spent his life building Harrison and Associates, and he was ruthless in his pursuit of justice. By Monday morning, Arthur had officially filed a police report and handed over months of meticulously compiled financial records to the authorities. My father's downfall was swift, public, and brutally humiliating. The local suburban papers, which used to feature Dad in glossy spreads about local philanthropy and architectural awards, now plastered his mugshot on their websites. He was formally charged with multiple counts of corporate embezzlement and wire fraud, because he had drained his own assets to pay off Savannah's debts and fund their Tuscan healing journey. He couldn't even afford a private defense attorney. The man who used to wear custom-tailored Italian suits to Sunday dinners was assigned an overworked public defender. Uncle Dave kept me updated, acting as a buffer so I wouldn't have to speak to them directly. The legal battle dragged on for 6 grueling months. To avoid actual prison time, Dad took a brutal plea deal. He was stripped of his architectural license permanently, sentenced to 5 years of strict probation, and ordered to pay back nearly $400,000 in restitution. He had to declare absolute bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on the family home, the house I grew up in, and auctioned off every piece of furniture, including the mahogany dining table where Savannah had first announced her trip to Italy. Today, my father, a man who used to design multi-million-dollar commercial complexes, works the customer service desk at a big-box hardware store. He lives in a cramped, dark studio apartment on the industrial side of the city. Uncle Dave told me he spends his weekends sitting alone, watching television on a tiny screen, completely isolated from the high society friends who abandoned him the second the scandal broke. But the universe saved its most poetic justice for Savannah. When Liam locked the door on them that rainy Saturday, Savannah actually did try to crawl back to Todd. She showed up at his restaurant in her soaked designer clothes, crying and begging for forgiveness. Todd, immune to her tears and armed with his own ruthless lawyers, informed her that if she ever stepped foot on his property again, he would hand over the security footage of her stealing his American Express card directly to the district attorney. Terrified and suddenly homeless, Savannah realized our father was no longer a viable host to leech off. So, she did what she always did. She looked for a new savior. She found him 3 weeks later at an upscale hotel bar in downtown Chicago. His name was Preston. He was charming, wore an expensive watch, and introduced himself as a venture capitalist from New York, looking to relocate. Savannah, desperate to return to the lifestyle she felt she was owed, clung to him like a life raft. Within a month, they had leased a luxury condo together. Savannah gloated to Uncle Dave that she had manifested her comeback. But Preston wasn't a venture capitalist, he was a career grifter. Because Preston had terrible credit from a messy divorce, he convinced a desperate, eager-to-please Savannah to put the lease, the utilities, and a brand-new Range Rover entirely in her name. He told her he would transfer the funds into her account monthly. For 2 months, he did. On the 3rd month, Preston vanished into thin air. He didn't just leave. He took all of Savannah's remaining designer jewelry, maxed out 3 new credit cards he had persuaded her to open for his startup expenses, and drove the Range Rover across state lines, never to be seen again. Savannah was left holding the bag. Because her name was on every single legally binding document, she was entirely liable. The irony was suffocating. She had financially ruined our father by committing credit card fraud, and less than a year later, she was financially ruined by a man doing the exact same thing to her. With no father to bail her out, no penthouse to retreat to, and creditors relentlessly hunting her down, Savannah was forced to face the one thing she had avoided her entire life: reality. To avoid being sued into oblivion and potentially facing jail time for the massive debt, she had to file for bankruptcy at 29 years old. The last I heard from Uncle Dave, the former golden child of the Harrison family, is now working the 4 a.m. opening shift at a chain coffee shop to afford a room she rents in a basement apartment. There are no more wellness retreats. There are no more first-class flights to Tuscany. Just the smell of roasted beans and the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. I only saw my father one more time. It was about a year after the wedding. Liam and I were at the hardware store buying supplies to build a deck in our backyard. We turned down the plumbing aisle, and there he was, wearing an orange apron, stocking PVC pipes. He looked small. His hair had gone entirely white, and the arrogant, booming posture he used to carry was replaced by a hollow stoop. He looked up and saw me. The color drained from his face, and for a second, I thought he might turn and walk away. But he didn't. He walked slowly toward us, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped them on his apron. "Chloe," he said, his voice raspy and quiet. He looked at Liam, then back at me. You look really well." "I am, Dad," I said. My voice was steady. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a profound, overwhelming pity. "I think about your wedding every day," he whispered, tears pooling in his tired eyes. "I would give anything to go back and sit in that chair." I looked at the man who had traded his dignity, his career, and his faithful daughter for a delusion that ultimately destroyed him. "I know you would, Dad," I replied softly. "Take care of yourself." Liam put his hand on the small of my back, and we turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was walking back to a life I had built with my own two hands, with a partner who never let me walk alone. In the end, you cannot build a sturdy house on a foundation of favoritism and financial lies. My father and Savannah learned that the hard way, when the reality of their choices finally caught up to them. I used to ache for the father who left an empty chair at my wedding, but today, I am simply grateful for the peace that came when I stopped trying to fill it. Some families are born, others, you have to build yourself.